work session, Goodyear City Council, Monday, February 1, 2010. All items listed are for discussion only. No action can or will be taken. All members of council are in attendance today. Councilmember Antoni, would you like to make a comment?
We don't have speakers.
Yeah, we're on yet. Eddie?
Oh, there we go.
Am I?
We're on now.
Am I on? No.
Yep, you're on.
Yeah. Mayor, I'm sorry. I got to interrupt and derail the meeting a little bit today. And sometimes these are easier said than done. Sorry.
No rush.
Ooh. Sorry.
We can make you laugh.
Thanks, Joanne.
About the three guys that walked in the bar.
Yeah, I know, huh? All right. I had a prepared statement, so I'm going to try and stick to script. Today's mixed emotions that I'm informing all of you that I'm resigning. Since 2001, I've poured my heart and soul into serving Goodyear. Oh, man, it's harder. George, I can't look at me. Sometimes as a persistent agent of change and always doing what I felt was in the best interest of the city and its residents. Since joining this council in 2003, we've had our challenges and some tremendous successes. The attraction of spring training, several new parks, improved public transportation, a boost in citizen participation, and greatly increased public safety service levels, resulting in lower crime and improved personal safety. Most importantly to me, a new ethics policy which will serve to keep our local government open and transparent for decades to come. I've had multiple roles over the past several years, that of husband, son, father, friend, public servant, professional, and others. At the end of 2009, I was offered an exciting new professional opportunity, which I accepted. This new role has many facets, which allow me to continue my involvement in the communities throughout the valley. Since accepting my new position, I've come to the realization that I will no longer have the luxury of indulging my passion for public service solely in the city of Goodyear. Unfortunately, we've only been given 24 hours each day, and my energies need to be focused on my career and my family. Excuse me. The experiences, friendships, and memories I've made since becoming a member of this council are ones I will cherish and hold dear. While my time as council member and vice mayor have been some of the most rewarding in my professional life, I need to focus on my, excuse me, it's harder than it sounds, maybe not. I need to focus on my young children, my lovely wife of almost 13 years, my spiritual life, and my career. I'm hopeful someday that I'll be able to embrace my passion for public service in this way again. I leave the city in very capable hands with a strong and talented city manager and a council focused on the citizens and the people of our community. It was not easy for me to arrive at this decision. I know you understand my personal tug-of-war in determining what was best for myself and for my family. I thank you for your understanding and your support. I know you will be thoughtful and diligent and open while appointing my replacement. Personally and professionally, I wish you well in the coming months as you toil on the best decisions you make for our community. Lastly, I humbly and sincerely thank each of you for allowing me to be a part of your team, and at times tolerating my tenacious focus in moving our city forward in a positive direction. Today I spoke to the attorney and manager and made them aware of that before I walked in the meeting. Obviously, that tug-of-war statement, you can tell. It's worn on my sleeve. So appreciate it. I tendered my resignation just before coming into the meeting with the city attorney, and he intends to file that with the clerk tomorrow morning. So with that, sorry to put a damper on your work session. Apologize to the two of you. But thank you.
I mentioned to Councilmember Antoniak that, as we just spoke, that we'll need to have an event to honor his service to this city.
I agree.
And we'll do that as soon as we possibly can. So we thank him for the positive expression of respect for this city and the members of the staff and council. Okay, we'll now get to the items for discussion. We have two items. One is the cost of services study, and the second is the foreclosure rates. And on the first one, before we start that, I glanced over the several items or several pages this weekend and didn't get into the narrative until this afternoon. And the narrative sort of took me aback a bit because this has not been in front of the public yet. Is that correct?
Correct.
Yeah, and as I understand the provisions here, it may not and others will not go before the public in a public hearing. I can't imagine us agreeing with that.
Oh, the user fees?
Yeah,
No,
I think the public hearing is absolutely
Oh,
essential.
certainly.
I think so. In fact, I have some concerns with some of these.
Yeah, well, so do I, but I think I'd like the public to look at them for the couple of months. There's both retail end here, i.e. the parks and that sort of thing, and then
Yes.
there's the wholesale end, development fees. I'm not questioning what you're saying right now. I'm just questioning the fact that the public should get to this before we do, in my opinion.
I had noted, still have to have public meetings online.
If we all agree to that, do we want to hear this, or do we want to get this to the public and let them start it off?
Mayor, if I may, I'd like to hear it, because part of this is a policy issue that we may want to discuss among ourselves, whether they're at 100%, 30%, so we can get a flavor for where all we're coming from, before that kind of goes to the public, because this is kind of the numbers themselves will fall out once the policy, works itself out on what we think, or whatever comes out as a recommendation, where that policy should be on what is recoverable and what's not recoverable. Some of these are 100, some of them are 30, and I'd like to hear the reasonings why they're at different rates. So I think there's value in having the...
Well, I would just soon let the public start with it, but I'll defer to you on that.
I have to agree with him, because I think the public needs to know some of our interpretation,
Right.
and what we feel. Then I think when it goes out to the public, they have something to
Yeah.
start with, because the public doesn't deal with this every day, but the people that have done the study and the people and the staff have. So I would rather see the discussion go out now, which gives them something to grasp.
Yeah, well, we'll do that then, but in fact, the public's the one paying for this.
I don't
Well, let
disagree.
me finish. They pay the user fees, and they're going to pay the development fees. So we have to make sure that the public is in support of these changes. And there's a multitude of them. Some are very significant, actually.
I agree that there's a number that are significant, but, there are very, very, I think, minor changes, within the entire listing of fees.
Okay. Well, the,
But, I
Seems
would
like
agree,
there's a
I would
consensus.
agree that maybe the public has to take a look at this.
and I would just, before I do any further, I would suggest that they get some time to look at this, a couple of months, and then, so that when the public hearing is held, the people are really ready for this. It affects their kids and their quality of life, frankly. So, but anyway, you're going to listen to us, so go for it, and then we'll all give our comments. Okay.
My name is Mike Adams. I'm with MGT of America, and this is more to give you a little bit of background about the methodology so that you have some comfort in when you look at the numbers that you see, that you know that there's a methodology behind it, and hopefully you're comfortable with it before it goes any farther. So I think that's kind of the purpose of this as well, is just to get a comfort level before it goes out to the public. So we'll talk a little bit about the overall project methodology, and then we have some highlights of some specific departments that we'll go through. And if you have any questions, please let me know.
Do you want us to pause as far as questions that you're going through, or just wait through what's all in, I guess?
Oh, no, I prefer
what
you
do
just
you-
ask whenever.
Then-
Comment as we wish. If That way we won't drop it later. You'll feel satisfied. Okay.
All right, thanks.
Okay.
So just sound off when you have a question or comment.
You know me, I don't have any trouble with that.
Yeah, I was looking at you, I don't know why, because I knew you already knew that, so. Okay.
Okay, I'll keep looking that way then. Oh, okay. Again, I'm Mike Adams, and I worked, myself and Eric Parrish, who's a partner in the firm, we worked with Terry Canada performing the user fee cost of services. Unfortunately, Eric just had back surgery, so he says he's recovering, but I think he's just lounging on the couch. But regardless, we'll kind of get started here. On the first slide, a little background about MGT. We're a consulting firm based in Tallahassee, Florida. We focus on public sector consulting, of which I'm in the cost services division. I do primarily cost allocation plans and user fee studies for various cities. I've worked with a lot of your neighboring Arizona communities. Eric and I have performed cost plans or fee studies recently for Flagstaff, Buckeye, Maricopa County, Coconino County, Yuma, Pinal, and the Department of Fish and Game. So we are familiar with the area, and we have spent some significant time here doing the same type of work for your neighboring jurisdictions. What is a user fee? That's the first question that most people ask, and why is it not covered by our taxes? And the real difference is that a user fee is something that you can easily identify the service driver and the recipient, or the person who benefits from the service. For example, a lot line adjustment where the person coming and driving the service is the person who's also receiving the benefit associated with getting the lot line adjustment. Conversely, you have police patrol services where the community benefits as a whole, and therefore it's not a user fee related service. User fees have various methods for recovery. There are many flat fees within a city. There are also hourly rate fees that are based on hourly rates, based on a deposit structure, program-based fees, and also percentage-based fees. So there are many ways or many mechanisms to recover these fees once we've determined what the full costs are. What is a user fee study? A user fee study can essentially be divided up into two parts. The first part is an accounting analysis to develop the fully burdened cost of providing each service, along with developing a consistent methodology within the city. You want to make sure at the end of the day when you're looking at a number that the calculations for planning fees are constructed in the same way and using the same methodology that recreation fees are being calculated, so that when you discuss recovery levels and policy levels, you're really comparing apples to apples. Make sure the same cost components are included in each service, whether it's direct costs or the fully burdened cost of providing each service.
So would it be fair to say your direct and indirect calculations, especially on the indirect, is across the board is pretty much the same as far as your calculations are concerned?
Correct. There's a slide a couple down where we kind of break down a few of the different cost components, but it's a uniform methodology that we took in developing and doing the analysis for the city. The user fee study is also a time where we can revise and update a user fee schedule. Over the years, a lot of times, the current user fee schedule won't reflect the level of service or the services themselves being provided by the city. So this is a good time to be able to go in and revise what's currently being done and offered by each department. This next slide kind of starts to identify your question. The first thing that we do is we go in and we catalog all of the current and potential user fees within a department. And not only that, we also look at the non-fee services within each department, because when we allocate things like overhead, we don't want to unfairly burden fee activities by not including non-fee areas or completely leave it out. So it's really analysis of the entire department as a whole, both fee and non-fee related. The first thing we do is calculate, or our methodology is based on calculating the full cost. You have the direct costs where you have the main or frontline workers that are associated with that interact with the public who are consuming the goods. You have the plan checkers and the inspectors and people who are out doing the instruction for softball leagues and things like that. Those costs are what we consider direct costs. The next stage is indirect costs, where you have not only materials and supplies budgeted within a department, but also department administration, budget personnel costs in each department, and then the citywide overhead or indirect costs that come from the cost allocation plan, which is a separate study, which goes and it calculates the central service support costs that each operating departments receive. So therefore, you're going to get your costs for the person, for payroll, HR services, city manager support, things like attorney support, so they can all be built and factored into the calculation of a fee. The next step is also there's some departments that support each other. So we have cross-department support. when calculating something like an adult softball league, we want to make sure that we have not only the recreation costs, but also the park maintenance costs associated with it. Again, that way we have a full picture of what the costs are to provide the service, and then the recovery level can be identified and set aside or implemented. The next stage, or once we've calculated the full cost, excuse me, then we get to the policy discussion, and that's kind of what we're going through now. Policy, some recommendations have been made by departments and city staff, and now we'll kind of go through those different recovery levels for the departments as a whole during this presentation, and that ultimately leads to that fee schedule that you referred to and the individual fees themselves.
A quick question. Do we have any adopted policies that have been in place on any of these fees to date that council has adopted as far as percentage recovery? Do we have any historical? No? Okay.
And it said in the report a decade ago that we looked at this. Is there a number to that decade? It just said
I'm
in
not
there.
sure of the
We
actual
hadn't looked
year.
at this for a
Looked
long
at it in
time, and they
1990.
used the word decade, so my question was, okay, when was the last time that Goodyear looked
Looked at it in 94 and 96.
94, 96.
And as part of the policy, because it's been such a long time, that's part of the whole revising of the fee schedule. There are services that were offered back then that don't apply now, and there are new services that are being offered by the city that aren't covered by that previous study. So going through the detailed study now allows those services to be incorporated into the fee schedule. I'll talk a little bit about the timeline. Back in February of 2009, we were awarded the contract and kicked off on-site meetings and citywide meetings shortly thereafter. Unfortunately, a user fee study is heavily dependent upon volume of activity as one of the factors. And during this time, everyone knows development activity and things like that, the economy as a whole has been changing. So it kind of put us between a rock and a hard place on really trying to get some useful data that we can use, whether it's looking at historical data and also kind of going forward with the way that the economy has shaken out. So that led the project to go on a little bit longer than expected, but we thought it was really important to make sure that we had meaningful data. Another area or item is that a lot of times some of the data that we requested from departments isn't necessarily match up with how data was currently being collected. So it was just, again, making sure that we had a meaningful relationship between what was currently being how they were being calculated and kept within the department, also how we would integrate them into our analysis as a whole. So ultimately now we are at the council work session, and I know you mentioned also now going into and having some workshops with the citizens, so I think maybe the last segment of actually getting it adopted and implemented may be a little bit longer as well. Here's a listing of the departments that we included in the fee analysis. We have development and related departments, planning, engineering, fire prevention. We also have some community service departments. Again, fire prevention kind of goes into both arenas, but we have parks and recreation, police, and then some departments that provide a few that are mainly central service departments or support departments within the city, but they also have a couple of fees that they provide to the public, or a couple of services that they provide to the public in city clerk and finance. The next slide talks a little bit about policy discussion and what fees should be charged and what level should they be charged at. And it's kind of illustrated on this next slide here, where the first question you have to ask yourself is, well, who benefits? Well, if the community benefits, then it's a public service, and it should be tax supported. Something like, again, police patrol services, where there isn't one distinct beneficiary of the service, but the community benefits as a whole. Conversely, you have, if it's an individual who benefits only, well, it's a private service, and it should be supported by fees. Development-related services, again, a lot line adjustment, somebody putting a swimming pool in their backyard. Those type of services are really kind of the black and white, cut and dry ones that are easy to decide upon, but it's the middle area where it's a little gray upon which ones should be fee supported versus tax supported, and what percentage that should be.
Historically, on the public-private, where you have the combination of taxes and fees, how do you, or on some of the discussions, how do you arrive at, should it be 30, 40, 50, 60, 20? I mean, is there historicals? Are there some comparisons with other cities? You know, I mean, where is that distinction kind of drawn for those that are kind of not black and white, but in the gray area?
I do have, unfortunately not in this presentation, but I do have some historic, from our previous clients that we know they've gone through the same methodology. Unfortunately, may not be neighboring jurisdictions, but they're cities and jurisdictions that have gone through the same study, where we have what their recommended recovery levels, where they were at, what the recommended recovery level was. In that sense, it's kind of an apples-to-apples comparison. For other areas, a lot of those tend to be community service-based parks and recreation, for example, where the city, people have, it's more of a market, an open market, where people, if they don't like what you're charging and what the service you're offering in Goodyear, they can go to a neighboring city to play softball. So that kind of gets factored in and what the recovery level would be. It's a little more open to the market. In some cases, there's, where it's a private-public benefit, something like a water heater installation, where the one person is definitely going to benefit from putting in a new water heater, but the community benefits by having it inspected and not faulty installation that could, potentially start a fire and harm the rest of the city.
So what I'm gathering from you when it comes to parks, typically, and again, I don't know if that's where this all falls out, but market-driven as opposed to a flat percentage, is that what you're telling me?
No, it's just one of the factors that has to be considered. And even within, as we go a couple slides down, you'll see the parks and or recreation recommendations. They vary whether it's adult sports versus youth sports. So that, yeah, there are individual factors that are unique within each service being offered.
Mr. Pizzillo, part of the difficulty and the problem, it's all in a value judgment, and it depends on what the community values. Parks and Recreation, for example, is probably the best example, where most cities I've worked with value youth sports, and therefore the youth sports are subsidized at a much higher level than adult sports.
To encourage people to actively participate
But
in
it's a value question as far as where do you land. So.
Can I make some assumptions then? If there's zero fee in there, then that's a new fee. If there's a fee in there, then that's just an update of an old fee? Would that be a valid assumption?
Yes. In some cases, there are new structures within a fee where there might have been one fee that was kind of a blanket fee for everything, but now we've broken it out into simple, moderate, complex, or something based on size. So in some cases, I'm not sure which document you're looking at right there. But
just the fee schedule where I
in
see
most
current
cases,
and zero.
we try to identify that it's a new fee, or if there isn't a fee listed, it's either a new structure or a brand new fee.
Okay. I understand your point about for a city, for a softball league, for example, that's why we brought together the recreational roundtable because that was all of the end users of the parks and everything that came together and discussed fees, and they knew that they would rather play many times at a Goodyear field than elsewhere, and so they were willing to pay a little more. But I think that that group truly could look at this and give us some feedback. And I wonder, is that why you gave such a range in some of the fees? Like you have, for example, going from $90 and then you say proposed fees, you put 90 to 130. I mean, you have this range. Who's to judge what the range is, or are you coming to that point?
Well, the recommendations themselves come from city staff. We do not make the recommendations because we're the cost experts, so we'll calculate what the full costs are. Ultimately, the city is the one who has to talk to the public about what the fee level is. So I would defer to city staff on what the actual
I agree with Joanne and the Recreational Roundtable. I would like to see them invited to the meeting, discuss this, because that was really a great partnership when we met with them, and I thought was good what came out of all those meetings. And so I would like to keep them informed and get their opinion on some of these.
They may not like it, but...
Yeah, they may not like it. And I see that we give the advantage to the young people who live in Goodyear, and we're charging those people So basically, many cities have gotten used to Goodyear's doing very well on the recreational department, and we offer a lot of services. People catch on really quickly to that they can get their child involved in a Goodyear activity because it's not going to cost them the money it's going to cost them if they do it theirs, or their city doesn't want to put out the money. So I think we have to be realistic on how well we do in Goodyear and how much we care about our youth. And the other cities need to sometimes step up to the plate. So I appreciate the fact that I do see these numbers that keep it low for our citizens.
And Terry can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that part of this, just having this discussion, is to get those policies put in place so that people know what the recovery levels should be and what should be recovered. Because if you don't have a study since 1994, you're just really not sure what those costs are intended to recover.
I will say I was a little taken back on the planning and zoning proposed fees. Were quite high. I have to tell you, it did get my attention quickly. So I would,
Going from 0 to,
well, 2,500 up to 10,600. I mean, the base fee, proposed fee. So at this time when the economy is the way it is, we probably wouldn't even be looking at this if the city had been going like it was 3 years ago. But now that we've slowed up, now we kind of hiccup when we look at this because we know how difficult it is for everybody out in their businesses right now. So I guess that's what we need to digest a little bit to find out where that level is.
That's pretty much in custom homes, right? Where an individual comes in, because it wouldn't.
You need to talk to the mic.
That wouldn't be part of the production homes. These are if a custom home builder comes in, or someone comes in and wants a permit for a custom home.
I didn't get that.
Again, I'm not looking at the actual document, so I'm not sure which fee or which service you're actually
Planning
talking
and
about.
zoning, I guess, right, Frank? On this
Yeah.
thing? Planning and zoning under,
Permit on every house, custom or otherwise, so.
But that's built into a production
And that's a
home.
percentage of construction costs usually.
No, these would be flat fees, these
Right.
planning fees that are here. So
These are
those
planning fees as related to actually building a home.
So the builder would be paying this up front to get the
Typically,
house
yes.
built. But if a
Typically.
custom home builder comes in and wants to build a house, he's going to be charged that same amount.
Correct.
That's correct.
Correct. There are different, I believe there,
Doing the plans.
Phil is here from community development.
if there's repeat, if it's a plan check or something like that, and there's repeat,
A design review for residential is for production homes. They submit a
Okay,
package
all right.
for multiple homes. If an individual came in, we just handle that as part of the building permit.
Okay, so
Senate talk, come up to the table, please.
Well, am I done?
I don't know.
yeah, I'm okay with it, except that the only question I have then, does this cover building permits for a custom home?
Oops.
Building permits are basically covered under the schedule that's in the building code. So the building permit fees actually aren't even in this.
They're not in planning and zoning? Okay.
They're
that's all.
handled, they're adopted with the building code, and then they're assessed according to the terms and provisions of what is specified in the building code based on the valuation of the building.
I can tell you, when I came to Goodyear, 1991, I went in to get my permit to build my house. I think it was $1,800. And today it's like,
It's more.
it's amazing. Yeah, okay. Thank you, Joe.
and just one more piece of information. The cost that you're seeing there, or the proposed fees, are based on the cost to provide the service. So the numbers you're seeing there are based on the amount of staff time required to perform each of those activities, plan checks, or whatever it may be.
Planning and zoning has really been adjusted heavily.
I think part of it is not having a study done in a number of years. Labor costs, along with just the complexity of development, has changed over the last few years.
They're heavy.
it was something that this is, I hate to say it's timely now because we needed to know. It's been too long since it's been looked at. And, I'm glad we're looking at it. I know we don't want to necessarily change anything, but I know that we need to realistically look at it. So.
Yeah.
We had the same problem with water.
Yes.
Nobody looked at it for a long, long time. So we ended it the same way, had to raise them, do them in installments. There have been a lot of things that the city has not looked at, a number of items the city has not looked at, and now here we are, having to at least cover the cost. And so I understand, it's just very frustrating and for us to swallow these numbers at this moment.
I think as you had mentioned earlier, whether one individual is benefiting or it's the community that's, partly with the taxes, I think it's important to know what this costs. So once you eventually get around to a policy, whether it's 100%, 60%, 30, whatever it happens to be, at least you know what it costs to provide these services. So I think that's important. Like it or not,
Oh, yeah.
On our next slide, we jump to some of the, we've already been talking a little bit about, but some of the proposed recovery levels by department. Again, the development department's planning, engineering, where the building, fire development. Again, full cost of being proposed or full recovery is being proposed. In fire prevention, it's a little bit lower. There's some annual inspections, but I know there's also some educational classes and things that go on within fire prevention. Parks and Recreation, each program, whether it be youth sports versus adult sports and special events, there are varying levels of recovery being proposed based on partly the benefit associated with each of those activities and each of the programs being offered. The police department has very few fees, and I think it's really fingerprinting, so it's one or two fees in which they're proposing a full recovery. City clerk and finance, they have a couple of fees within each department associated with business license processing and special events and liquor license. So for those fees, they've also recommended a full recovery. It's not a recovery for the department as a whole, but just for those particular services that they provide within city clerk and finance.
That's not a question I had. In fact, that was one that stuck out when I was looking at liquor license. Why have we lowered that, opposed to lowering that fee?
Well, that's based on the amount of time associated to perform the service.
You got to get it annually now. So, yeah, it goes down for the beginning, but you pay for it every year.
So they have to come back to the city every year. It's not a one-time.
Yeah.
That's right.
I'm not sure of the city
Because in the past, it's
guidance.
That's
only
the way
been
it reads here.
a one-time fee, hasn't it?
One-time fee until this. The one-time fee, Frank, went from $780 to $635.
Right.
The annual liquor license renewal went from $0 to $635.
That's the difference.
Every year, I'm sure our bars and restaurants are going to be excited when they see that.
I can't see lowering it at all. Okay, go ahead, I'm sorry.
Now, we did, in defense, there are other cities that do this, so it's not
Do
like
what?
that. Well, Chandler and, what was it, there were two of them that were,
I don't remember.
Kevin, I'll have to, I underline.
Chandler and Glendale.
Chandler and Glendale, so it's not like this is something that's popped out of nowhere, but, again, I guess time and circumstances play a great deal in making decisions.
Frank was talking about liquor license. You're talking about the public hearing.
No, I'm talking about licenses and other, my understanding,
Well,
some of these.
That's what they were referring to.
But it's my understanding there are cities that have these fees. Am I incorrect on that
No,
assumption?
no,
Oh,
no,
okay,
no.
okay.
No, the Glendale and Chandler,
Have
they
an annual
apparently
fee.
do not have the public hearings.
Oh,
That's how they were mentioned. That's why I interpreted that. But go ahead.
Now we're going to jump into a brief discussion of each department, kind of talk a little bit about the analysis that was performed for each of those departments we just listed. The first department is planning. Planning is one of those departments, I think, when you were looking at that fee schedule, they had maybe a lot of fees that were restructured or reclassified within the, better reflect the services that are currently being offered, whether it's residential versus non-residential. We analyzed approximately 65 fees or 65 services, both fee and non-fee related within the planning department. The planning department, again, is really interesting right now because of the amount of development and how the numbers have changed over the last couple of years. So it was a good time to go in and kind of reevaluate what services are being offered and what the fee levels were. Right now, if the current recommendations are adopted, the increase, and again, considering that the volume statistics, but the incremental revenue or the increase would be approximately $70,000.
Again, these fees are not being recommended by you, but they're being recommended by the staff itself.
Correct. We calculate the cost, or essentially what the fee should be if you choose to do 100% recovery. So we establish that side of it, and then the city recommends the fee level itself.
Some of these fees are substantial, and I think, we should be discussing these fees departmentally to determine why the increases are so high or why they were cut out.
In some cases, it may have been, when the last study was performed back in '94, there may have been a policy to have a lower recovery level, so it may show a fee of $1,000, but really that's only a 20% recovery level, when in fact the costs have been the same over the years, it's just that the fee was consciously subsidized.
We were having the same discussion with our water company to the north. They haven't had a rate increase in 4 or 5 years, and now they're really hammering us, or trying to hammer us. So basically, we're doing this. I don't usually use the word hammering in this report. I think this is the same study.
That happened about 2 years ago in south of I-10. So now it's happening north. But now, with what we're doing with the city on the water fees, it's a gradual, each year.
Over a 5-year period, we're implementing that.
We're getting it back up to where it will be self-supporting, right?
Yes. I think the important thing from this fee study perspective is to look at the fees that are recommended to be charged. The maximum is here, and it's basically, my philosophy is not to have existing residents subsidize new residents. So if you start from there, you can tell us, hey, you've got to go lower anywhere. But just remember the philosophy that the fees, according to the experts, are justified at this rate. What we're going to subsidize, that's the question that's before you tonight.
Well, I will say the mantra of this council's been, since the day I got on it, was development should pay for itself. Does everybody remember that?
Oh, yeah.
Because I've heard that echoed through this council over and over and over again. So I guess we're doing it, and now I'm gulping. But that has been what we've said all along.
And what's unfortunate is that you haven't looked at this since 1996 or 1994.
Yeah.
And that's wrong. And so,
That's not good business practice.
no. It's just like when I got here and heard that the water system was being subsidized by the general fund. That's not right either. And that's been changed now.
A couple of things that I'll add when the staff was looking at this. There is consideration, we did do comparative analysis with the neighboring cities, both for the development-related fees and also for the parks and recreation, for different reasons. But we do have the comparative analysis. It'll be in the report. The other thing to consider is like back to the city clerk's license, there are a number of cities that do charge that. So when there was new fees, we also looked to see if it had been precedent set already that someone else was charging that fee and not try to gouge.
It certainly would have been helpful to have that kind of information at the same time that you're reading this. Does anybody else agree with that?
I agree.
I
That'd be
would like
helpful.
to see what the other cities are doing and the time frame that they increase theirs, and because it gives you an idea. You're able to look at that city and say they're developing in the right direction and they don't seem to be having any problems, and so you sort of can learn lessons from a report like that. So that would be very, very helpful for me.
This is also something that Romina needs to continue to watch, because at our last update, she said there was someone trying to pass legislation that would put a moratorium on our permit fees, just like they did on
Right.
the impact fees. So we need to watch that, too.
Well, and we do need to use common sense in the downturn of the economy, too. I mean, that has to play into, as much as we would like to hit that top number, I think we have to make that consideration and be somewhat simpatico to our development in the good year.
There is a final report that'll be issued that will have all of that information, including the comparisons. But part of the reason why it's not included here is because we wanted to discuss the recovery levels, and if these levels are appropriate, then they get incorporated into that final report.
And I think that's more important than seeing what the other cities do. What is our recovery level? It might be different than the other cities.
I agree, Frank, but again, it's always nice to know what it's costing us. I agree with you there, what these fees are costing us.
I like all of the above.
The next department is engineering. Engineering is very similar to planning in that the volume statistics and the amount of services was something that we really had to work with to try to get some useful or meaningful information to try to, and so we don't have estimated increased revenue just because of the kind of the way that the economy's been and the way that statistics or development has gone. But within engineering, we analyzed approximately 110 services. Engineering is kind of the biggest department in terms of the different fee structures within the city. They have flat fees, they have hourly rate fees, they have fees that are incrementally based on square footage, lineal feet, things like that, hourly rate fees. So there are a lot of different aspects to engineering fees, again, that are all essentially development related, and that they are recommending a full recovery for those development related fees within engineering.
In account, there are 33 changes that have been made in the, I guess, from the old report to this report.
But the engineering, it doesn't have that much increase in their fees. Am
Pardon
I
me?
looking at the right one?
No, they go from 0 to numbers,
Yeah.
about a
These
third
are
of them.
zero.
Which one are you on? On good, this one here. It says
Engineering.
Department.
Engineering department.
Yeah.
And the next page, it's,
But
they were all zeros.
But the amount is, sometimes, well, the highest is $121, 120,
There's a 300.
118,
But they're per
300, yeah,
per
there's a
foot,
300, but,
and they're per square
overall,
yards.
they're-
It's pretty expensive, I think. If I were a developer or basically everything in engineering we're charging for here,
Well,
which is maybe true, maybe the way it should be.
And they need those
Expensive.
different recovery level or methodologies. That's the best way to relate the service being performed is a measure of rather if it's square footage or per foot or whatever it may be. So that's why there's so many different types of fee structures within the engineering department.
Quick question. I noticed there's a lot of zeros and that now have fees. Was there a standard on how to break these down into all these different little activities? And the second question is does our system have the capability of now tracking every one of these separate little services so that you can pull a report down the road to see what kind of money that you're getting from every one of these services?
Well, on the
That's probably, well, you and I guess Terry on that.
The first part of the question and how we created the fee structure was we started with what's currently on the books, and we talked to them about what's really going on, what doesn't apply, what would be a better way to break it out. And those fee areas came straight from them. The structure came from city staff. I can't personally tell you the difference between some of them, but once we've listed them, then we can cost them out, and we were able to get meaningful data on the structure and also the time associated with that activity, so it was a good measure of what was being done. On the side of how the tracking system would work, I would defer to city staff on
Yeah,
that.
so the second part was to take that, and we did have a limited amount of revenue codes that we were using. It was hard to go through the study and determine how much money we were collecting for all the levels of fees, all the detailed fees. So that's something we want to improve on in the future.
Will this take new computer software to try to do that? To make it that
No.
detailed?
No, we have HT, and we should be able to break those down into broad level categories. We do it a lot on the planning and zoning side. We just didn't
Okay.
do it as much. For some reason, everything was kind of, I would want to say, lumped together in engineering. And again, without doing this type of study for the last so many years, we really didn't have a need for that level of detail. But going through the study, it was hard for us to determine, what detail was there without breaking it out.
The question I have is on Army Corps of Engineers, when they come in and make a recommendation on some of these drainage things, especially on the washes, is that taken into consideration? But does that mean our engineering staff have to redo that? I mean, what's the relationship? Dave would know.
I kind of defer a lot to staff because they're the experts in this field of what they're doing, the activity and the charge. And so they probably have better answers than we do.
We have our engineering design standards, and what is not covered there, we generally refer to, we use the flood control district standards for Maricopa County. And between the two, we pretty much cover, we address all the different kinds of improvements related to drainage.
Is there any fee from them? Do they charge the city, the flood control or Corps of Engineers, either one? Do they charge the city for any of these services?
No. Well, the main services we would use from flood control would be, I guess, referring to the various design manuals that they put together as a reference, but they do that as a service countywide, so there's no charge for that.
Okay. Okay, thank you, David.
Mike, let me ask you about plants and shrubs and trees here. Just 76 cents for plants and shrubs, $1.52 per tree. Does that mean that along our roadways, that for every plant that we look at, it's 76 cents? And do we have to?
What section is it in there?
Engineering.
I would again have to defer to staff on what exactly that
It was
inspection
zero,
is. If
anyway.
it's, yeah, I'm not sure what that inspection is intended to recover. That would.
So it's got plants and shrubs above it, so same thing.
The very last page.
Rip wrap? That's what
When we started issuing permits for
I lived with that all.
landscaping, the first permits that we issued had to do with, primarily with trenching for the irrigation lines in the right-of-way. And that covered that part of the installation. We never had a kind of a distinct charge for inspecting the plant material. It just wasn't in our fee structure. And so there is a certain amount of effort that has to go into. We don't necessarily physically count one by one every plant that we inspect, but the landscape architect, when they design the plans, they will give us an inventory of how many of each type of plant or tree or square foot of turf. And we make, in the plan review process, we do a quick check of the quantity and then sign off on the quantity, and that's what the fee is based on. So this is to capture the actual cost of the inspector to have to go out in the field and verify that the correct plants have gone in, which we didn't charge for before.
Well, then, hold just a second. George has just mentioned riprap. What about this riprap? That has to do with that's, I guess because I live in a custom home development, I'm always making reference to how we need to use riprap there, but in a production system, that riprap has not been charged. I mean, haven't been charged. When you engineer to have something to put riprap in, there's a charge for that now, where there wasn't before?
Let me just explain, I'm sorry. I
Yeah.
showed my ignorance. I didn't know what riprap meant, and that was our private
Well,
conversation here.
it was on my list to look at too, though, but why did that come from zero to a charge? And what kind of a charge is that?
What is it?
Riprap is large stone, basically, that wherever drainage would come from the street into a retention area, there'll be a pipe leading into the retention area. And rather than just dump the water out onto the DG or the turf where it would cause erosion, we put the large rock at the outlet, mainly to dissipate the energy of the flow, and then cause it to spread over and not cause erosion.
So what's the unit charge here?
It says 36, and I'm
Against what units, though?
36 cents is probably, it doesn't have units here, it's probably, I guess it'd be per square foot. It's either per
What's the
square,
typical square foot?
it could be typically, say, a 10 by 10, so say 100 square foot would be typical. It could be larger depending on the size of the pipe.
So if you have a situation where riprap wasn't used, and then there is a downpour, and we have a problem where because this has happened here before, and it rips through a community. Now we've got this all torn up. Now the riprap has to be put in and redone. Who would pay for that if it's not under warranty and it's an older development? Does that come under any of these fees?
The fees here are for the initial installation.
That's just initial installation. So that would be the city's responsibility.
It would, depending on who owns the area, the retention area, it could be an HOA owned or it could be city owned. Whoever would own it would be responsible for repairing it.
So it could go back to the HOA.
Could, yes, it could.
All right, thank you. Okay. Interesting.
On our next slide, we have fire prevention. Fire prevention can really kind of be broken into two areas. We have development, which is being recommended at full cost recovery, and is tied to the building code, and the fire prevention, annual permits and inspections, and education, community outreach, where the recovery is, I believe, 84% on the previous slide. But with the new, a handful of new fees for annual inspections, the proposed increase in revenue would be approximately $117,000. We analyzed approximately 100 services within fire prevention, again, with the bulk of the new revenue coming from new fees for annual inspections. On the next slide, we have Parks and Recreation. Again, Parks and Recreation is a little bit different of a department because there are competitors in the market for these services, and I think that is taken into consideration when coming up with the different recovery levels. Also, the community benefit associated with a lot of the programs. Youth sports tend to have a lower recovery level because there's an inherent benefit of having youth occupied in doing these activities rather than out on the streets. Adult sports tend to have a little higher recovery level because they can, excuse me. But again, they're also generally subsidized because there's just a benefit of having the community out doing recreational activities. Most of the, I'm sorry?
Question for you, had the 80% target cost recovery for the adult sports, I assume, is that residents?
I think that's for the program overall.
Okay. Do you have a slide down the road that's going to split residents and non-residents?
It's actually in the fee table.
The fee table itself?
It is.
Okay.
And they're going to be average recovery.
Average recovery?
There's often a resident discount in place. One thing to note, the increased or potential revenue of the $155,000, most of that is associated with special event fees. So it's not, it would be implementing new fees for special events rather than a drastic increase of each of these program areas listed above.
The other thing that I'll add here is this is one of the areas where there is a phased-in approach, and I think it's over three plus years, because, you know, it is one of the target audiences that, you know, they're looking at doing a lower percent recovery, and then just the idea that, you know, to pay for kids softball or whatever, we haven't been in the market in so long to do this, that the cost could have doubled, but we know the feasibility of doubling the fee would put people out of, you know, participating. So Parks and Recreation has a phased-in approach, which will incrementally increase these participation fees.
Now, back to the field rentals, I mean, that comes back again to that recreational roundtable, because they put in their own way that if you are not part of the recreational roundtable, your fee was higher also, and your availability was higher. So this definitely we're going to have to move this through them.
Yeah, I've heard that also.
Why is it the fees for residential and non-residential are basically have been the same?
Have been the same?
Yeah.
In the past?
Adult sports, facility rentals, special events.
Yeah, I can't answer on the past fees.
We charge differing fees.
And I think, Mayor, what you're getting to is when I see this current and residential, it has ranges. Is the top end the non-resident and the bottom end the resident? Is that what that is?
It's the same ranges.
Yeah. I mean, is the bottom one the resident and the top one the non-resident? Is that how that goes, Mike?
Are you referring to the
proposed
user
fee?
Exhibit A user fee schedule?
Yes.
I think the idea was to create a range of fees for residents and non-residents. The idea behind putting new programs in and or taking programs away, what we didn't want to do is try to come back to City Council every time we added a new program for a fee range. You will find that non-resident fees do vary based on the type of program or program function that you do offer. Again, I think that is a value decision that we can talk to City Council about in terms of what is the quote-unquote surcharge that you apply to non-residents versus residents. We typically have not had a huge difference between residents and non-residents in the past. And the idea behind the range gives us the ability, based on the type of program we're offering and the participation level, to determine, is this a high-end, non-resident type program? If it is, then obviously the surcharge would be a little bit more to encourage resident participation and vice versa.
A question. This year, have you seen or should you say last year, have you seen a change in participation in all programs across the board? And if you saw that, was there value added for the fact that non-residents were part of, in other words, if we didn't have non-residents as part of some of these programs, would they have not made it because there wasn't enough participation?
To answer your first question, yes. Our program participation has increased dramatically this past year. Where we see the biggest non-resident effect is in the adult sports. Because they're registering as teams, and adults don't necessarily just socialize with Goodyear residents. They socialize with people that they network at, with jobs. And so you'll have a team that's made up of Avondale, Litchfield Park, Surprise, Peoria, Goodyear residents. And we do have a rate based on the type of, how much residency is made up of that softball team. We have not seen a huge difference in terms of the individual registered type programs, the Little Leagues or the
babysitting clubs.
Little League's a bad example because that's residency. But we haven't seen a huge difference from a resident versus non-resident participation standpoint. We have just seen an overall increase, 10, 15, 20% in our program numbers. The resident versus non-resident overall, big picture, is made up of 70% residents and 30% non-resident.
While you're here, on this adult sports, just single headers, say it's $300. It's for both resident and non-resident, $225 to $300. Does that mean it's $300 per team per season, or is that per team per game?
Per season, per team per season.
Okay, so, all right. Okay.
Now, Mike, the problem when I'm reading it, and bear with me on this, when we go to the residents, when you have a 225 to 300 and a 225 to 300 for non-residents, that's the current, and then you go 225 to 375. How do you calculate what the proposed increase I mean, what's the average increase that these fees are looking at based on what we're currently charging versus what the proposed charges are?
$40 to $50 per season, per team.
Let me
Which
ask
if
you,
you
on
break,
a-
if
on
you,
a-
go ahead.
On an average overall percentage, I mean, what would you say, looking at your schedules you put together?
As far as a fee increase goes,
Yes.
it's in the neighborhood of 10%. And it's partly because we have not raised fees over the last couple of years.
So all of this, on average, ups, downs, lower, you're looking at 10%.
Correct.
Thanks.
Sure.
On our next slide, we have the police department. There are relatively few fees within the police department. They have fingerprinting, which of the higher volume activities, and I believe they have bike registration, which there's a very small amount of participants who register their bike within the city. But for the fingerprinting activity, it's been recommended at full cost. Our next department is the city clerk. Within the city clerk, again, most of what the city clerk does is a central service or a support department within the city, but they do have a few areas and a few services that they offer to the public, one of which is the liquor license we've talked briefly about, and also special events. They're kind of the home for special events. They do a lot of the routing amongst each of the departments to get everybody to sign off and do a review for the special event. So we've calculated one fee in the city clerk's department that's reflective and encompasses all of the city departments associated with a special event review. And altogether, it's approximately $12,000 in potential revenue associated with these activities.
Quick question on the liquor license. We were looking at ways to recover, which is usually when they come in the first time. Is there a thought process by adding a license renewable on this liquor license? What was the thought process behind that?
My understanding for having the same cost is that the costs associated with the liquor license are the same, whether it's an initial or a renewal.
Well, I realize that, but we were talking about cost recovery, so the biggest cost is when they first come in before the city council, and the processing. After that, it's a matter of, since there are state liquor licenses, for us to charge a fee, I would think that would be more revenue generating the second time around than it would be the first time around. Would that be a fair assumption?
Annually?
Yes.
Well, I would think so. Yeah, annually.
Question about special events. Is this a permit that is at one of our parks? I mean, that's pretty much why you would have to have a special, in other words, we're not going to be now charging a special event fee for the chamber putting on a business mixer at a business. So this is just a special event fee that is at one of our facilities. That kind of crowd is going to be there.
Our last department is the finance department. Again, very similar to city clerk. Most of the costs associated with finance are supporting or central service department within the city. They do have one particular program, the business license application, and we costed out a couple different fees for the business license, and with that, it would be approximately $110,000 in potential revenue in recovering the costs associated with the business license program.
This was actually approved and adopted in the.
Yeah, I was going to say, this is,
It was just part of the study as we went through it.
That's something we've already done,
On the CFDs, that's something that's, I don't know if our citizens realize how onerous CFDs are in this city, but they vary from 1% to as high as 5, or will be 5, against secondary property taxes. So it's a very significant amount of money, and it's relevant. If I were a developer, I would certainly love CFDs. It just seems like it's too easy to get into it. $100,000 for a 5,000 or 6,000 home master plan community is not a lot of money. And I haven't thought about it in too much detail, but I don't think it should be that easy to get into a CFD because the citizens are going to be paying it.
I agree with you. I agree with you there.
That's the first, you've been here
I know.
once already.
Hey, every once in a while we hit there, Mayor.
But anyway, just,
With that, if you don't have any other questions on the methodology, I will turn it back over to Terry for the last couple of slides. Oh,
That's all right.
sorry, I forgot you added that one.
So in summary, with the estimated revenue for the fee changes that we have, we're estimating about $400,000, of which some of this has already been, like I said, the business license we've already instituted. I think we've collected almost 110 year-to-date with the renewal that was this January 1st.
Terry, on that, is the 110 being double counted then? Is it not 464, but 350?
At a point in time, it's at, yeah, right today it would be less than 110, because we're already collecting that, and we did budget for that, coming forward. Is there one missing in here? Okay.
I noticed courts wasn't part of this. Is that we had, did we do something already with courts? Is that why? I mean, I've heard snippets, but you didn't include courts in this.
Well, that wasn't part of our scope of services, so.
Yeah, the courts are, just not here, but the courts are governed
Right.
by a different agency.
Right.
And so the fees, the fees are mostly mandated.
Most of them are statutes.
He gave me a little of that information, but I just realized that it wasn't part of this one. Okay, thank you.
What we need to do, Mr. Mayor, is to figure out a game plan as far as how to take this out to the public, and we will report back to you how we're going to do that and when we're projecting a new implementation date would be. So we've certainly heard what your concerns are, so.
I just, but how about these, having a fee for the 4th of July, Halloween? You want to charge people for that now? And one of the nice things about Goodyear is 5,000 people just stream into the grounds and enjoy themselves.
We kind of charging our own. We'd be kind of charging our own for a fee.
Yeah, and we'll probably have fewer come.
I think our Citizens Budget Committee is the perfect group to look at
the
this.
same thing.
I mean, this is certainly,
Give them a good assignment.
yeah.
I hope. All right, anyway, that just was thrown out there.
So continue with the process. We're here tonight to review the recommendations. We also have a couple other steps that follow this. I guess according to John, we'll probably get back and do some work sessions or public notification, and then probably the implementation. The regulation is that once you adopt the fees by city council action, we have 30 days, which we have to wait before we implement them. So that'll slide accordingly. The other thing is we were going through this, we hadn't looked at again in a number of years, was the actual legal process to adopt the fees. And so we're proposing to streamline this process, change the city code, Chapter 20. The idea is to simplify it. The other thing was there were some restrictions on the timing of when you could do the study and when you could adopt the fees. We kind of want to put that in sync with what makes sense as far as the staff doing the work, and then also get the numbers earlier in the year so that we can use those to incorporate our budget projections. And the other thing that we wanted to streamline was adopting the fee tables that you have in front of you by resolution. So if we want to adopt these or change these in 2 years, and we go through, we can just change the tables, pass it by resolution, and be done with it. The final thing that will help this is there's also a provision in there to change the cost annually by an inflationary index, which is perhaps what in the ranges with Parks and Recreation would be something that would be beneficial to them. And this is part of the council package that will come back. I guess, are we going to change that too then? Okay, it'll be when we adopt the actual fees and resolutions, so this will be delayed too. So again, tonight we're here to look at the policy, the cost recovery levels, which you've seen for each of the activity areas, talk a little bit about the administrative changes to the ordinance, we'll postpone or defer the adoption of the resolution and the implementation dates until we get a little bit more instruction on how to move forward with the public participation. And that concludes our presentation tonight on the cost of service study.
Are you saying there hasn't been a public participation since '96?
There has not been, no. The last time we did kind of a somewhat comprehensive study was back almost a decade ago.
Well, I think there was a consensus here that we wanted that. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, if we're going to follow through on that, we're going to have to move fast with the April 1st date.
Oh, it isn't going to be April 1st. We will make whatever modifications we need
okay.
to submit to you.
The fees are just required to be implemented at least 30 days after you adopt.
Nice job.
Thank you much.
Okay, we now move to a briefing on foreclosure rates and parish fees.
I have Western.
No, I had that also.
They're not there.
That was canceled.
Oh, okay.
Aye.
The tab to go to the next one. Here.
Thank you.
Mayor, Council, City Manager, this evening our guests are from WEMAR, the West Maricopa County Regional Association of Realtors, and WEMAR is also a part of the Arizona Association of Realtors. And tonight we have local real estate broker Sue Fluke, who's also on their Government Affairs Committee, Pat Murray, an associate broker who's on the Board of Directors, and Carl Giordano, top producer in Goodyear. As well as in the audience, we have their Government Affairs liaison, Wendy Villa, and the CEO of WEMAR, Roger Nelson. So tonight, they're just going to give you an update on foreclosures in Goodyear, how it compares to other cities in the valley, and some of the implications economically. Sue?
Welcome.
Thank you very much for having us. I appreciate the opportunity a little bit. Both Pat and myself are also Goodyear residents. I have two daughters that live in Goodyear, so we do, not only are we working in Goodyear, but we live here, we breathe it, we care about this city. So we appreciate you asking for the opportunity to kind of educate you about what's going on in Goodyear as far as not only foreclosures, but short sales and how that impacts the city and what you can expect for the future. A little bit about WEMAR. We are 6,000 members, and there are 425 of us actively that live in Goodyear. And we work on public policies and try to help cities through the real estate market, if you will. And we like to partner with the different entities. So part of what we're going to be talking about is not only the state of our economy, but Goodyear and the surrounding communities and how you look compared to the surrounding communities, because there are enough similarities that I think it bears looking at the future of what Goodyear is looking at in the next 5 years, and then if you have any questions. Some of what you can now expect on mortgage defaults, if you actually look at it, it shows you where we're at. We have just now started the process of these option arms. And I think when you look at where we're at and where we're headed, you can see the next few years is going to be a pretty bumpy ride for housing. Those are the mortgage resets themselves, the option rates, the subprimes. We've been through the bulk of the subprimes. Now we're into those option arms and the Alt-A's. You can see with bank failures, 140 banks failed last year with $36 billion in losses. It was the worst ever for bank failures, significantly larger than the average for banks that failed during the savings and loan. And those losses have skyrocketed. You've read the news about the FDIC, Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac. Those things, they're 10 times more per failed financial institution than they were 20 years ago.
The FDIC.
Yes.
Question,
Yeah.
this option arms, that's when they reset?
Yes.
Okay.
So we're just now coming into those waves of the option arms that came in 2005,
Do we
2006.
expect more problems with foreclosures when those arms reset?
Yes.
Possibly.
Possibly, because the loan modifications have not been working. 50% of all your loan modifications are going back into foreclosure.
Now, when they reset, do they have to qualify for the 20% again as far as the value when the houses are upside down? Will that hurt as far as reset?
That's what's happening right now. My daughter, who lives in Palm Valley, just tried to refinance out of her arm. And she bought 15 months ago, and her house is already worth $100,000 less in 15 months.
So what happens?
She can't refinance.
She can't refinance. So what happens to her at that point?
She decides what she's going to do. Right, she actually put 20% down, she's made every payment, but she's one of those that's a good borrower. There's a lot of borrowers that can't make that payment.
And most of those have a 2.6 cap, is that what they are?
Or a 2.5, hers was a 5. Mm-hmm.
Margins are normally,
Yeah, because she put the 20% down, the government actually came out with 125% if it would at least appraise for 125% of her loan. Couldn't even match that, couldn't even get there for a streamline. The commercial debt, that usually follows your residential market. And what you need to be watching for in your commercial are your tax revenues. That will be a good indication of what's happening in your commercial industry. And if you know anything about what's going on outside Arizona, California, and Canada are actually looking very strongly at Arizona because it is the cost of doing business in those two areas has significantly gone up. So
Now, looking at your graph here, what I'm hearing out there is that commercial may be the next shoe to fall.
it is.
And looking at these debt issues you're talking about, that's not until 2012 where the 1.8 trillion becomes.
Where the big one is, but
Yes,
the
right.
commercial always is usually 2 to 3 years behind your residential.
So we may not be out of the woods with commercial by any stretch of the
No.
imagination right now.
No, and that's why they said, watch for your tax revenues from your commercial right now, because that will give you a good indication of where you're going to be standing. All mortgages right now, this is nationwide now in 2009, total distressed properties were 9.5 million. Predicted sales were 4.7 million. This is Goodyear now, specifically in 2009. You had a total closed of 2161. Out of that, you had 62% of those were distressed properties. In the entire MLS system, it was almost 70%, so you were slightly better than the entire MLS. And you have some pockets that were not as bad as other, like Pebble Creek was not nearly as bad as some of your other areas. 2,000, yeah, go ahead.
ARMLS, 92,000 with distressed.
Almost 70%
70%.
of that. So of those sales, of those 92,000 sales, were actually, those were the third best year in MLS history, by the way.
In this area.
No, MLS is the entire metropolitan Phoenix areas. So that was the third best year of sales, with almost 70% of those being distressed properties.
This is not good.
No, it's not bad.
No, it's not, but I think you all, especially in the city level, need to be aware of where you're standing and what to be watching for.
How'd you get this data?
We did a lot of research. Part of the national data came from RE/MAX, and then part of it was us doing our what we do every day.
Good job, thanks for
No,
helping
no,
out.
this is very
There's
helpful.
through MLS, and then there's a Comfort report, and there's different ways to get some of this data.
Your 2008, just to compare, because that was what Parrish wanted to kind of see the trend, if you will. Your distressed properties were only 41% in 2008, so you increased 20% in a year. There's Avondale. You can see they were a little bit worse than Goodyear, 83%.
This is in
For
09.
2009. Buckeye, 81%.
And we were 62.
Yes. Litchfield Park, now, this is a little unusual because Litchfield Park does not break down into just Litchfield Park. It's the 85340 zip code. But that was 76%, so you were better than Litchfield Park. Holliston, 87%. Surprise, which is probably comparable to Goodyear in a lot of ways, as far as what the city looks like, and it's 71%, so you were still better than Surprise.
And I'm sorry, this was strictly residential, not any commercial
Strictly
added to
residential.
it.
This is
Okay.
not commercial at all.
Well, and I think here, if you take Surprise into account, if you went back to 2008, which we didn't,
Right.
2008, Surprise would have been significantly different because they got hit first sooner because they had appreciated later. So they were more of the first to drop.
Correct. I kind of put these in a chart so you could see them side by side, if you will, which is your next chart. So you could kind of see total 2008, 2009 for Goodyear, and then the other cities that we were comparing them with.
Where do you think 2010 is going to be?
Well, that's where we're headed. I also did some comparisons with the East Valley, so you could kind of see where you're very similar to Chandler as far as the numbers percentage-wise. Gilbert was a little bit higher out there, and Mesa, because your outskirts areas with the newer growth is what got hit first. If I looked at Maricopa, you probably had 95% out there. I mean, it really got hit bad. Scottsdale, of course, is the last to be hit because it's the higher-end properties. But we're starting to see now the short sales, $3 million properties going for $1 million.
Kind of short sale, but yeah.
A short sale is where I owe $200,000 on my house, and I can't make that payment, and so the bank agrees to take a payoff of less than $200,000. So we sell the property for $110,000, and the bank agrees to take whatever they get. And you walk away usually clear. You can't walk away with any money.
There's a lot of factors
Right.
involved here. But basically, the bank is forgiving the deficit.
You know, you hear a lot of comments about short sales, particularly the Hall Real Estate Agency.
Right. Well, and what you have to look at is there could be a first and a second, maybe even a third. The first may agree to a short sale, the second and the third may not. And we're an anti-deficiency state. The first may be, if they got foreclosed on, wiped out, but the second and the third would actually go after the homeowner in court to get that deficiency.
Possibly.
Possibly.
Well, there are some drawbacks on short sales.
There could be, yes, and that's what this whole thing is about. It's not an easy thing to do a short sale. They are a lot longer to even get closed, and recently we had one that actually went to auction after 2 years and 16 short sale contracts, and the bank let it go to auction and took for less than what the original contracts were. And that's part of what we'll talk about as well. These are the big ones that are actually controlling the market right now. The Fannie Mae, the Freddie Mac, Citibank, Bank of America, Wells Fargo, of course your big lenders.
Sue, just a quickie, does
Sure.
the anti-deficiency clause, does that protect a person who rented their house out?
It depends on how they lived, how long they lived in that, and had it as a primary residence before they rented it.
It also has to do with the hardship of the particular owner. If the owner can prove a hardship, then yes, it possibly could be forgiven.
Sure. Because they could be renting it for less than what their mortgage payment is.
That's what the new law, if it comes back into place, addresses from an investment point of view.
Part of what's going to impact 2010 and through 2012 is this new federal streamlined short sale program. The banks were not ready for what happened. They had to get ready. They had to hire people. They had to get them trained and train them on what to look for in these hardships. But what the federal government said is it makes sense for you to take a short sale versus a foreclosure, and here's what we would like you to do. This is not mandated. This is just a suggestion, but most of the big banks are already starting to work towards this. So we think the short sale market will actually help in the long run before they go into foreclosure. It's a lot better to do the short sale than the foreclosure.
Some of the numbers I was reading the other day was 48% of the homes, I don't know if it was Maricopa County at large, were upside down.
There's about 50,000 right now that are in some form of distress that haven't hit the market. About 50,000.
And some of the concern, and maybe you've seen it, is, I've heard neighbors and whatever talk about the fact that they're so far upside down that the banks won't talk to them if they're making their payments. So they're even thinking about actually not making their payments so the bank will talk to them. So the logic just seems out there, but I'm hearing that.
And
Are you seeing that?
Yes, and we're actually seeing some of the gurus of people out there saying, don't make your payment. We don't tell people that.
Yeah, that
We
just
never tell
seems,
people that.
that just seems crazy. But
Just because you could still start the short sale process even though you're current. Because again, going back to that hardship, you may have a few dollars in the bank to pay your mortgage, but you might not have a job.
Right. Well, the banks are now learning that, and that's the other reason why I think this will start to you'll still have distressed properties, but the distress will not be as bad as what the foreclosures do. Anytime the foreclosures hit, they can decimate neighborhoods. There's what January 2010 looks like. You're in a distress factor right now of running very close to 66% of what you've got going are distressed properties.
So we were 62 last year.
Right. For January alone, you're running at 66%.
so it's going in the wrong direction.
Right. Remember that first chart where I said the resets? We're just now in the beginning stages of really what the distress is looking like. This is your inventory just through, and this was through last Monday, closed so far in January, we're 89. So over 75% of your closed inventory in January was distressed properties. Look at the, what's kind of interesting is that active on market with contingencies taking back up, there's 161, and out of those, 160 of them are distressed properties. So only one regular sale.
Just for clarification, REO,
Right.
that
Bank-
stands for real estate owned,
Right.
which simply
Which
means
is bank
bank
owned.
owned.
Bank owned. So the outlook, your distressed properties are going to continue to dominate. We think the short sales will increase with the bank's improved infrastructure and their mindset. So now they've got their mind wrapped around that a short sale is better. The federal guidelines kick in. But through, in that first 3 weeks, you had 2585 trustee sales in Goodyear alone. The majority of those will foreclose.
There are a lot of buyers on those trustee sales.
Sure, a lot of investors. Mhm. The REOs will continue. We think the differential will start to shrink. Housing prices bottomed early in 2009. We're actually seeing a slight increase in the average price, which is good. And then first-time buyers were, of course, a big factor in the last quarter of last year, and we will continue to see that through April 30th, depending on what they do with that tax credit. So,
Just to address your comment, your last comment there, one of the stats that we don't have in here is that in 2008, the trustee sales at the courthouse step, if you will, was only running about 3%. It's now running closer to like 15% are being sold at the courthouse step. So that's indicative of your investors or people that have a pool of money put together, whatever the case is, stepping in and starting to snatch part of these up.
yes.
Or these TV auction sales. How valid are they?
Well, there's been some talk about that. They give you a little teaser rate. They'll say it's $25,000. That's not where it sells for. They're wanting people in the door to get them off their books, but those are all bank-owned. All bank-owned. All bank-owned. Mhm. This is what, in the future, you need to be looking at, where your market is going to be coming. That's why I said Pebble Creek is actually a very important part of what you have going on here, is because we don't have as many distressed properties in Pebble Creek. You've got 80 million people that are the huge influence for the next 40 years, and that's why you need to be looking long-term when we come out of this. You've got 48 million very skeptical buying market right now, and they're the ones that, the short sales are not really for them, but foreclosures technically are. 74 million people in your future workforce, and those are usually your new neighborhoods. Your population growth, vast majority are going to be immigrants and their descendants, vast majority. And the immigrants for Goodyear are not just what you call the typical immigrant. We look at them as retirees coming from the north, your second home buyers coming from Canada. They used to buy in Mexico, now they're buying here. First-time home buyers again, your move-up buyers, migration from other states, migration in Arizona. Rural Arizona is struggling right now, and so those people will start to move into your metropolitan areas. Migration due to business growth, your Suntech, that's a huge thing for the city of Goodyear. And then, of course, whatever happens with Luke Air Force Base. If we can secure that, that will mean some growth for Goodyear. So, there you go.
What's the good news?
Good news is that banks would rather do short sales than foreclosures.
They are
That's
getting that.
good news.
Mhm.
Good news is that the Department of the Treasury is suggesting to banks that they speed up the short sale process. That's good news. The good news is that Goodyear is doing a lot better than your surrounding cities. The good news is we're still selling houses every day. And I'll tell you right now, Goodyear is definitely a destination city. Always has been for a long time, and it still is today, because your buyers look at these numbers. When we're talking about bank foreclosures and trustee sales at the courthouse steps, believe me, every investor there wants to buy a house in Goodyear and put $20,000 in it, new carpeting, paint, some landscaping, throw on some granite countertops, and flip it in Goodyear.
He doesn't want to use it for rental property.
Typically, no. Some do,
Right.
okay? But mostly they want to
But
win, put
even
20,000.
the renters right now, because we also do property management, and you would rather have someone in the home
Right.
than a vacant piece of property. You can see it every day. And they would rather live in Goodyear and Avondale, to some extent, than you get into the Buckeye. It is very difficult to rent a house in Buckeye.
Right. Distance is a problem.
Right. And they are, Goodyear, the city departments are actually very good to work with when it comes to utilities and turning on for tenants and turning on for agents to sell the short sales. So you've got to look at the whole big picture of what do we have to offer here and
And what more can we add?
Well, a proactive approach is the thing to do. You need to be where a lot of cities are looking at how can we tax to the nth degree. And the sales tax did hurt a little bit when it comes to if a tenant is usually paying those sales taxes, those rental taxes. If they have a choice of renting here versus a home in Avondale, and the difference is Goodyear homes are actually renting for slightly higher than Avondale, and now they also have to pay a higher tax, and that could be $20, $30, $40 per month difference. They'll go to the next city because it's very close. So that has hurt us a little bit.
That was on people that owned multiple homes rather than just the person that was.
But if you property manage, it doesn't.
Well,
You really want a property manager because the we actually have to make sure that those homes are maintained. So it is a little different.
The good side of that is that versus in 2004, any investors that are buying a second home for a rental now, they could very possibly be in a positive cash flow
Right.
for what they're having to pay for these properties. That usually puts you into a position where they can keep them up, they can, everything else that goes along with it. We haven't seen our rental market really increase in
Our vacancy rates are very
revenues,
low.
but it's still the same. We're not even as high as we were in 2001, 2002, as far as a rental property is concerned.
I think, I know Avondale has suggested a joint task force with some of the players that are in the market, if you will. Your banks, your real estate people, your city group. I think that has helped Avondale anyway to wrap their arm around what's going on and be in a proactive world. I think that's a good thing. Get your stakeholders in here. Your commercial people are going to be in this. And get them in here and see what you can do, going after the California market or the Canadian market. As far as economic development, you have a great story here. You've done a lot of good things. The Indians, the Cleveland group, that whole complex there, you're going to see a lot of tourists come into that area. That's a good thing. So I think you're on the right path. I just think you need to go now the next step and say, okay, not just for here, but 5 years and 10 years from now, where do we need to be?
I think we have taken somewhat of an active
Right.
part in the California population through economic development.
Right.
I know that I've talked to them and on the GPEC board, that one of the target is California and other states. You're absolutely right. But we have been taking some steps.
Right, you have, and we do recognize that. That's one of the reasons why when my daughter wanted to move here, where we looked. She wanted to live in Goodyear, and she actually works in Massachusetts, and she works from her home here. So that's a huge commute for her, but she wanted to live here. I sold her a home in Goodyear. My other daughter also is a school teacher. She moved from Avondale to Goodyear on purpose. And that's why we live here, we work here, we breathe here, our offices are here, so we do care about this city.
Carl, where do you live?
I've been working in Goodyear for the last dozen years or so, but I live in Litchfield Park.
I know you do.
I know you do, Frank.
But he sold me my home in Goodyear.
That's true.
We could annex you,
And I'm not opposed to that. Don't even bring that up.
Between their roads.
We don't need that.
I got a little rise out of that.
Yeah, I bet you did.
Quick question. Is there anything coming down the pike as far as those that, from a residential standpoint, can make the payments but are upside down, where they're going to have programs where they can refinance at the lower rates? Because you had to, there for a while, and I was fortunate, I was like at 85 and I was able to refinance it at some point because Fannie Mae owned it. And I didn't realize that Fannie Mae owned it. All you had to be was in, I think, 90% or something along those lines. But there's a lot of people who can afford that are making payments that are actually upside down. It would be nice if they'd have the opportunity, because there's not a credit risk, but they just don't meet that valuation. You know of anything down the pike that's coming in along
And
those
I think
lines?
there's some grants. I think applying for some of those federal grants especially, I think Goodyear could go that route. I think if you could even work to keeping people in their homes is the critical thing. And I'm not sure that the banks will ever get to the point where it's, okay, you borrowed $400,000, you just don't want to make that payment because the house is now worth $200,000. I'm not sure they're ever going to just say, okay, we're going to forgive $200,000.
Well, there is a bank that I'm not at liberty to talk about at the moment, but I can tell you what they're trying to do. In the metropolitan area, they have 18,000 mortgages out there, 18,000 different homes. Not all of those 18,000 are distressed properties. Some of them are distressed properties. They want to wipe all 18,000 mortgages off of their books. They are willing to work with the person who is distressed, and they are going to give the person who is not distressed but bought their house for $500,000, $400,000, and it's only worth $200,000 to get out from underneath that mortgage. Because they're thinking down the road, that person will be distressed. So that is a program that is actually going on in California right now, that's moving this way. And it's just in its infancy. So it's just in the beginning right now. But that's one particular bank that just wants to basically wipe the slate clean and let's start all over.
So you have to remember the banks were looking at hardship packages that really weren't hardship. They look at the credit card and they're still eating out every night, or they have the Escalade, or their kids are still going to private schools, or whatever it is, and that's not a hardship in the bank's minds. They had to get through that and get people trained on really what are true hardships, and there really are.
Don't they set up some kind of a formula, and then you end up in a percentage, something like 32%, if you were in that 32% from where you were when you bought your home?
Yes, but those people, yes, there are true distressed. You need to understand, there really are true distressed people. They've lost their jobs. That's the wave that we're seeing right now. The people that have lost their jobs or one of their jobs, and that income has really dropped significantly, and they can't afford to make that mortgage payment. But there are people that are, before they get to that level, will go out and buy the bank foreclosure and then walk away.
Well, there's a lot of people that are actually currently living in their homes that can make the payments. They can actually afford to make the payments. What they're looking at is, I bought it for $350, it's now worth $100. I don't want it.
Right. Yeah, right.
And you end up with the situation we had a little while ago where we were saying the banks won't even talk to you until you turn around and get behind. And then when you throw that data in front of the bank, they're saying, you can afford your payments. But it becomes a choice as to whether or not they are willing to turn around and make those payments or not make those payments. And she touched on it a little bit. There are some financial advisors out there that are saying that especially if this is a second property that you own, if you've made this purchase for the purpose of an investment, you're not going to see the return on your investment ever in your lifetime. Walk away.
We really didn't see that the last time, the time before this happened in the market. People did not walk it. They took the responsibility, but now it's that mindset is totally different now.
It is. The HOAs that used to be your partners in your code enforcement and what a property looked like, they're in distress right now. And so they're not making they're not doing that job anymore because they're hurting. I think cities could possibly, and we've talked about this, I know with Glendale, I'd love Goodyear to do this too, what we call the green lien, where you actually can lien a property for unpaid utilities. And you do that sooner than later. That way, when it does go into foreclosure, the bank has to pay that off. That's money that you could recoup because those services, you have provided that property.
Homeowners' fees can be done the same way, right?
HOAs do. Unfortunately, they're actually holding up some of the closings right now.
Yes, I know.
They have a little bit more control than anybody.
Yes, we are. I know about those.
They do.
Yeah, I've always been of the belief the full recovery is not going to take off till they deal with these foreclosures. You know, 2 years ago, in my view, if they'd have taken the money that they were giving to the banks and allowed people to stay in their homes by maybe subsidizing the interest rates down to 2.5, and keeping them in there, they would have put money in the pockets of those in the house that could have spurred on the economy instead of spending it on what they did. And I'm still not convinced we're out of it yet until we stop these foreclosures.
No, you're not going to be out of it. You're talking 2 to 3 years yet.
Short sales are going to be around 2012 to 2014. That's how long they're going to be around. When I say around, they've always been around. Foreclosures have always been around. But the popularity of them is going to be around that long.
And we know that the late 2005 or mid-2005 into 2000, all the way through 2007 buyer is the one that's in the most trouble. And for Goodyear, that's the two different zip codes.
Right.
You know, the one zip code falls into that almost extensively, and the other one is a little bit more seasoned. But that's the definite impact. That's where the arms were really prevalent. That's where the loans were really being done. That's where the 80-20s were a standard, and it's where everybody was looking for what they were. And then all of a sudden, when the market reverses and goes the other way, then they're also the first ones.
Because those buyers, they had two loans, 80-20. They had nothing in the property, so they had nothing to lose. Your more stable neighborhoods, the north sectors, the Palm Valleys, the Pebble Creeks, those people, we put 20% down. We're not going to easily walk away from that money.
Well, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank
Great
you.
presentation. Everybody out
Thank
there
you.
is thankful.
I have to say, that was the most comprehensive report.
Thank you.
Are you just surprised I'm clapping about
No, I just wanted to finish my comment. I think all of us.
Sorry. We have this little thing all the time, so I'm
One
sorry,
of us
Mary.
is chair and one of us isn't.
I know.
So,
But I'm a responsive person, so.
okay, very grateful for what you've done here, and all of us have learned a lot, and I think we'll corral this information. Probably
If anyone has any questions, certainly you could call us, email us, you know how to get a hold of any one of us. We're always around, so.
Okay. Any further?
Just one last comment. If you're looking for updated numbers,
Yes.
they can be made available. I mean, this is pretty current right here.
Can you make it available for us?
Yes.
Is that what you're saying?
Yes, uh-huh.
I think we'd love that to happen. You do that, what, monthly or quarterly, or?
You can do it on a daily basis if you want. If you want it that much. If you want to keep awake at night, that's what you would do.
How about monthly?
Okay.
Is that all right?
We'll
mind?
actually give you the information, and you can do it as often as you want.
Okay. Great. Thank you very
Thank
much.
you.
Meeting adjourned.